Thank you so much, Pedro. It's beautiful to be able to have a little bit of music for a reading. It's a thrill to be here in the Brooklyn Book Festival. This is the first time I've had a chance to be a part of it, although some of the writers here have already, last year, were able to be here with some translators talking a little bit about Granta and a little bit about their work. I'm going to just very briefly set the course. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion, and we'll be able to hear the writers reading from their work. We're going to read in English, unless somebody would like to hear somebody read in Spanish particularly. But in order to communicate a little bit what they're writing about, we have marvelous translators who have done extraordinary work. So we'll be reading from their translations, and each one will let you know who they worked with before they read their translations. My name is Valerie Miles. I am an editor, a writer, and a translator. I live in Barcelona. I've been living in Barcelona for almost 30 years. So I'm a very kind of rara avis. I'm a Spanish language editor. And Granta, we started Spanish Granta in 2003, thanks to Richard Ford. Richard Ford has always been very close to Granta since the Dirty Realist issue. And he was in Spain one time in early 2000 and mentioned that Granta had been at one time translating and publishing a lot of Spanish language authors, but that somehow that connection had gotten lost, and he kind of challenged me to see if maybe we could do something about that. And that's how Spanish Granta came about, and we've been publishing, like I said, since 2003. So in 2010, we decided, as Granta has the tradition of doing selections of kind of, these once-in-a-generation selections of writers that are emerging sub-35. We decided to launch our first issue of a selection sub-35 in 2010. And from that issue, we were able to discover voices like Samantha Schweblin, or Paula Olo-Isharak, or Andres Newman, Andres Barba, many writers from all over the Spanish-speaking world that were young and just coming up at that time. And so now we decided, 10 years have passed, so it's time that we do the same project. Making a selection is always a very difficult thing to do, and it's of course arbitrary depending on the jury that you have together and the tastes and the knowledge and all of that. But at the same time, it's also a very interesting exercise. It allows us to use the same exact criterias 10 years apart and see what comes out of that. And it allows us to study a little bit what is the current trends, what's happening, where the voices are coming from. For example, in the issue in 2010, it was very heavy. There were a large number of Argentine writers and a large number of Spanish writers. And in this new edition, we have a number of writers that came from Mexico, for example, 4 writers from Mexico. We had a number of writers from Cuba, 3 writers from Cuba out of 25. So it's very interesting to see, where those trends are taking us. And a little bit what we're going to be talking about is some of these. We're going to bring news from the Spanish-speaking world about the literature that is emerging now through the voices of these extremely talented young writers. So, without further ado, we have David Aliaga, Irene Reyes Novarol, Mateo García Lizondo, and Alejandro Morellón. David is from Barcelona, and he works in the tradition very much kind of studying Jewish identity, which brings his work very much, brings Spain into that very large European tradition of literature, which he's going to kind of talk to us a little bit about. Irene is from Sevilla, and they're going to talk about their work without me going into long biographies and wasting time. And Irene is from Sevilla. Mateo is from Mexico, and and France, Paris. And Alejandro is from Mallorca, although he lives in Madrid. He's lived in Madrid for many years. So I'm going to pass the first question to David Aliaga to tell us a little bit about your work, and then we'll hear you read something.
Okay. So thank you very much to all of you to stay here. Weather conditions are not the best, probably to walk from home to anywhere, so many thank you to stay here with us. As Valerie says, I don't know if I'm very representative of what Spanish literature trends look like, because what I'm trying to do is to connect Spanish literature writing in Spanish with all that European tradition whose aim is to explore the Jewish identity through language. As you probably know, the Jews were expulsed from Spain at the end of the Modern Age, and for many centuries there aren't Jews in Spain. And a good friend of mine, historian Manu Valentin, usually tells that for many Spanish people, a Jew was a kind of a magical creature from that Modern Age books, like an unicorn or a reef. And what I'm trying to do is to explore that thing that here in the United States you have normalized, which is you have the Jewish American fiction, which is not as usual in Spanish language. We have Eduardo Halfon from Guatemala, or maybe Esther Seligson in Mexico. In Spain, maybe in the last 2 or 3 decades only, Esther Benhaddad probably is exploring what means to be a Jew through fiction. And this is what I'm trying to do, to understand through literature, through fiction, what does to be a Jewish man in Barcelona in the 21st century, and how literature can express that experience of being.
Would you like to read us a little something?
Okay. The short story that Granta published in that issue is entitled Insomnia of the Statues, and it starts with a trip of an editor to Montreal after a few days walking around other writers and publishers in the city. It's starting to snow, it's at night, and he's trying to wonder what that gathering with other people makes him learn about himself. So, I'm not really sure why, but I decided to leave Rue Notre Dame West, one of the streets that serve as a guarantee of my nighttime walks, and turned right. I found a slightly darker street. The lamps on both pavements were more spaced out than on the main road, and it appeared that the men and women who lived in those 3-story houses had decided to go to sleep even earlier, except for one woman. She must have been 10 or a dozen years older than me, though I might be wrong. She was sitting beside the window in a relaxed pose, with her hair tied back anyhow, comfortably dressed and reading. I found the picture strangely satisfying. It was somehow reassuring to watch her for a few moments, as if I were sitting in that living room for myself, in baggy trousers and a sweatshirt, with a book in my hand, feeling the central heating at a temperature that allowed my body to call it home. I tried to make out, from all those meters away, what book it was that she was reading. My eyesight did not, of course, reach that far, but I got into my head that she was reading an Ernaux, or at least that is how I wanted to complete the scene. I don't know why Ernaux and not Modiano, say, who much more melancholy and nocturnal. Maybe because the woman who had been sitting on my right on the plane from my stop in Frankfurt to Montreal had been reading The Years, and I had snooped indiscreetly over her arm and thought Ernaux seemed like a writer who was powerful and delicate at the same time, discovering that her books were inhabited by rage and subtlety. But then, I hadn't read any more Ernaux than the 440 paragraphs from The Flight, and I couldn't ultimately know why it placed one of her books into the warm hands of that woman with the messily tied hair and comfortable clothing who was reading in her apartment. The reader must have noticed that there was somebody watching her from the street, and while if she could have seen the look in my eyes, she would have found, I like to think, a frank, almost tender curiosity. She nonetheless moved away from the windowsill, turned off the light, and went to read somewhere else because, through the room remaining darkness, its contours continued to be illuminated by a blaze of a lamp somewhere deeper in the house, in a room my curiosity couldn't reach. I set off walking again, and a couple of blocks later, it occurred to me that perhaps I ought to retrace my steps and ring the doorbell to apologize. Who would be happy having some stranger gaze intruding into their private space? To have a pair of eyes questioning a scene from our lives, asking, who are you, and why are you reading by the window at these times, in those clothes, with your hair untidy like that, and what book are you reading? Why that book and not some other? What are you doing alone and awake when the others are sleeping? What does all this say about you? And what can I imagine, I, who don't know you at all, except that I've started to create your portrait to enclose your existential possibilities around those queries that I express with the absurd legitimacy of someone looking from the street into your apartment. But that would be only have been weirder still.
Thank you. What's interesting about this issue is that it brings together 23 different countries, 23 different ways of speaking Spanish, vocabularies, histories, all of the different ways that the language is used and the mixes that go into the traditions that have created these writers today. And it includes 4 continents. It's, of course, North America, South America, but also Africa and Europe, because there is Guinea Equatorial, where they speak Spanish as well. And we were lucky enough to find an excellent writer from Guinea Equatorial who made our issue even that richer. What's interesting is in each of these countries, there are also a number of different languages that go into the Spanishes, right? I'm just going to read a very brief, because if I say it, I'll say it, it'll take 15 minutes. If I read it, it'll take 3. But so that you can understand a little bit everything that we confronted when we were making this selection of writers. What stands out about this selection of young Spanish language novelists is the fact that the writer's work grows out of a single language that expressed in 23 different nationalities and the discrete infinity of ever more local permutations, regions, towns, villages, a single language with endless bifurcations of tradition, history, amalgams of races and religions and geographies spanning 4 continents. The word for green, beans, is a good case in point. In Spain, they're judías verdes. In Mexico, ejotes. In Argentina, chauchas. In Chile, porotos verdes. In Peru, vainitas. And Colombia, habichuelas. It's the same thing. So Nabokov liked to equate Russian vowels as being oranges and English vowels as being lemons. And I wonder if Spanish vowels wouldn't be more like the clusters of red arrows in a pomegranate. Spanish is the world's 2nd speediest language, after Japanese, by syllables spoken per sentence, and anybody who likes Almodovar can see that that's true. And the longest word in the language is hippopotomonstrossequepedialiophobia, which means fear of long words. So like how not to adore a language that does something like that, right? So in many ways, this issue, bringing together all of these extraordinarily talented young writers in one issue, all of these different forms of the Spanish language, is in many ways just a great celebration of the vibrancy and the vivacity of the language as it is being used today. So on that note, let's move on to Irene Reyes Noguerol, who's going to tell us a little bit about her work and about the different things, that the influences that kind of have come into the way that she's writing.
Well, thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you, everyone who's here with us today. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's also my first time here in the United States, and having the chance to participate with my colleagues at Brooklyn Book Festival is just wonderful. I would have never thought of that. And if we're going to talk about my influences, I don't know if I could situate myself into in a specific tradition, but what I usually like the most in the writers that I read is those authors that we could call masters of style, I think. And I'm thinking of authors like Rulfo or Mariana Travasio or Sara Gallardo, whom I've been reading a lot recently. And I feel like they have this sort of telluric strength, like they're forces of nature that just get into your heart, to your core, to your feelings. And it's a big pleasure reading them because they pay attention not just to the text as a whole, but to the details. And that's what amazes me. And also, I think I could talk about authors who are interested in attempting hybridism. Because, you know, we are in the 21st century, and I think it's time to break the boundaries between genres, to shatter the glass in between them, because we have narrative, but also poetry, drama, and it's obvious that there are many influences running in between them. So authors like, I don't know, or Sergio Pitol or Carlos Frontera are great doing that. So they are some of the writers that I admire the most. And I think that finally I should be talking about writers who feel literature as a slow issue. Because I think that humanity and art in general require a reflective pause, which is not quite frequent in those days when everyone's in a rush and we are always running, trying to get somewhere. And Andres Neumann, who was selected in the Granta in 2010, says that reading makes time. Reading literally fabricates time. So having the chance to sit down, stop for a moment and read a book, I think that's something important to become a writer, but also to have this pause, to slow down, to really feel and get penetrated by what we are reading.
Wonderful. Would you read us something?
Yeah, okay. So the story which I sent to Granta is a story about a small girl. She's just 7 years old, and she has to look after her little brother, but also she has to care for her mother in order, well, so she doesn't hurt herself or her kids, because she has a personality disorder, a bipolar disorder. And sometimes she locks herself in the kitchen and she turns on the gas. And well, this is the end of the story, the last paragraph of the story. So yeah, I'm gonna read it. It's quite influenced by Sylvia Plath's Life and Death, also by Anne Sexton, and there it goes. When she gets home, she learns to change nappies and hold her breath so she won't be sick. It smells like gas. Sometimes she eats, sometimes she doesn't. But she goes into the pantry and tries to get food ready for the brother. She reaches up for the bottle of milk and can almost touch it. She's almost there. She stands on tiptoe till she can't anymore and the bottle spills all over her hair. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The warm liquid gets in her eyes. She imagines the taut udder being milked. Milk from cow mama that runs down her body, and someone left the gas on. She starts to retch. The pictures on her favorite t-shirt start distorting, but never mind. Never mind. She tries to find a cloth as her feet are getting wet. The baby is frightened, so she conjures a smile for him, gets him to dance in the pools of white worry. Splat, splat. She claps for him and comforts him with cuddles. She combs his hair. It's blonde and soft and shiny, Goldilocks. Sometimes the porridge gets mixed in with his dirty nappies, but never mind. Never mind. The girl handles it and changes his brother again and tells him it'll be fine. Don't be scared. Though she can still smell gas, and this time Mama has shut herself in the kitchen. How much weight can the spider web bear? There's no time. Her masks blur together through the glass. Her outline is translucent before the oven. Why is she bending down? Why isn't she moving away? She turns her face toward the shouts. I am looking on the last sunset. I'm hearing the last bird. Towards the voice covered in milk and piss and horror. She doesn't say anything because there's no need. The girl sees and the girl hears and the girl says nothing. Clever girl who always knows what's going on but today doesn't get there on time. Doesn't turn off the gas. Doesn't get there on time. Outside, the street and the rain. November rears its head in the puddles. The smell of wet earth. Thank you so much.
We're going to listen just to, and then we'll continue with Mateo. So much. So beautiful. I would also like to thank the Brooklyn Book Festival for being here, but also there is somebody very particular that I would like to thank, and it's Andy Tepper. He's been so incredibly generous to us and helpful, because since we come from, across the ocean, it's nice to know that there's somebody here who's a landing and who has been so helpful for us to know how to navigate. Thank you so much. And yes. These kind of people are very important to be able to help that these things that we can come and give you our news and read to you. So also I want to thank the Spain USA Foundation, because they have helped to sponsor so that we can get here. And also the Spanish Embassy has helped quite a bit for us to be able to be here in Acción Cultural Española. One has to be very grateful when institutions get involved in the arts. So we thank them very much. We'll move on to Mateo García Lizondo. Mateo is working in very interesting areas. And also I want to say, before getting to Mateo, just that the translators who worked with David and with Irene are Danny Hahn, Daniel Hahn is the person who translated David's piece, and Lucy Greaves is the one that translated Irene's piece. And we worked very, very closely with the translators, and they had a chance to kind of exchange with them, and we consider it a big community. And I can show you, this is the British edition or the English language edition. This is the Spanish language edition. And the translators are in both. Even though their work doesn't appear in the Spanish language edition, their names are there. And we give them their bylines and let everybody know that in the English edition, their work can be read. So we feel very strongly in Granta about translation. So moving on to Mateo. Mateo works quite a bit in the kind of border areas of consciousness, mycelial consciousness. We could say he spent a lot of time in Oaxaca. He just got back from the exploring areas in the jungle in Colombia. He does a lot of work in that kind of tradition. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Hi. Thank you all for being here. It's a privilege to be in New York and presenting this. Thanks for coming under the rain to listen to us. So yeah, as Valerie says, as a writer, I think, as any Mexican writer, I think I'm interested in borders. I think it's where the most interesting stuff happens, always in the borders and in the extremes. But the borders that I like to explore are internal borders. They're places in the thresholds of consciousness, in the places where you move from waking to sleep, dreaming. In the stories that I'm writing, of which Capsule, the story that Granta is a part of, they're always about characters in the thresholds of consciousness. So they're always about psychedelic drugs sometimes, but also death, rebirth, madness, neurological issues, even love, because I think love is an altered state of consciousness most of the time. And so, yeah, my work often comes near to science fiction or horror, or sometimes even metafiction, through the use of consciousness. It's often what I'm interested in. I worked in cinema for a long time, and I always found that screenplays are always about seeing something from the outside. And what I like about narrative is the way that you can access the consciousness of characters and speak from the consciousness of characters. So that's sort of what I'm interested in literature. So yeah, if you like, I'll read a bit from the story. For those of you who haven't read it, it's about a person who is imprisoned for life, but his sentence is to drift away in outer space inside of a small capsule. And so yeah, I wanted to explore a bit of what happens when consciousness is confronted with the immense vastness of space. And I found out that the first reaction is like a sort of existential vertigo, but then it's followed very closely by unbearable boredom. And so this story is about that, so I'll read you a little bit of the story. And he's traveling in space, and his only company is a small shrub. So, okay, I'll read you from here. I travel hundreds of thousands of kilometers per hour. At such speeds, the stars leave streaks in the sky. Everything swells with light, and the darkness is invaded by a pale, milky glow. You can see electron storms in the distance, and deep purple and crimson clouds that form when stellar winds make contact with the ambient radiation. Sometimes I feel the swampy give of matter as it changes states and assumes the nebulous, velvety texture of time. And I know I'm slipping along the waves that form on that border, like an insect suspended on the surface of a pond. I think it's happening, Polycarpus. Something, a black hole, or maybe the very center of the galaxy, is pulling us towards its core. It vibrates with a deep, low thrum. Can you hear it? We're getting closer. I'm afraid it might want to dice us up, atom by atom, to pulverize our consciousness and sprinkle it over its breakfast. but I think we both fear the other possibility even more, that as we approach the enormous body that's luring us in, time will pass slower and slower, and we'll never get anywhere at all. There's always the option of pressing the shit button and blowing myself up. How twisted can we get as a species that we do this to each other? I'm not sure why I keep holding back. It can't be fear. Anything at all is less terrifying than this. Polycarpus thinks it's because I'm stubborn. Maybe so. It's constantly begging me to take the plunge. It says it doesn't want to spend eternity this way, that there will be no one else to make the call once I'm gone. It says it doesn't want to see, it doesn't want to know. But I think I do want to see what's out there on the other side of time. I hope it's not a long, sharp knife slicing out some poor idiot's liver. That would be incredibly disappointing. Don't be a wimp, Polycarpus. What's the worst thing that can happen? Are you scared we'll get stuck in time? Tell me how that'd be any different from our current situation. It's a glorious opportunity. We can risk it all because we've got nothing to lose. I'm not even sure we're still sane. But don't worry, we'll work with whatever we've got on hand. I'll try to keep my eyes peeled and my finger on the green button, and I'll transmit what I see. My girls deserve to hear about this. They deserve to know what's above them in the heavens. That's what we're here for, Polycarpus, to fling ourselves irremediably into the void and describe what we see as we fall. We've been traveling through nothingness since the day we were born, darting across time, feeling like we're going nowhere, advancing toward the colossal force that eventually will cause us to disintegrate. It's just that we realize it now. We can see things as they are. The correctional system has opened our eyes, Polycarpus. This is a translation by Robin Myers, by the way. Thanks. And it's a beautiful text. I like it better than the original, to be honest.
Thank you, Mateo. And finally, Alejandro Morillon. Alejandro is the type of writer who can kind of put his mind around anything and find the form for it. He doesn't keep himself into any one. He writes poetry, he writes story, he writes travel fiction, or travel fiction and travel nonfiction. He writes novels. He works in a mystic vein, sometimes the apocalypse, sometimes kind of surreal, sometimes realist fiction. So he's widely, very broadly eclectic in that sense. So Alejandro, perhaps you can tell us why you don't repeat genres and why you don't repeat yourself in form.
Okay. Thank you for coming. First of all, I want to apologize for my poor English, awful English pronunciation. For answer you, Valerie, it depends on every book, on every moment, because I like to think the act of writing is a way to understand the world and his changes. So in every book I ask myself what kind of writer I am, because every book is a way to understand my own life. So I think the interesting thing about literature is that is when the literature become the best way to express the reality. So when the reality changes, also my mind changes, also my need to explore new paths. I think is the word. So sometimes it's a great thing to feel, because when I don't know what kind of writer I am, it's like it's a good feeling. I think it's the feeling that I have. I want to have in my writing life. So explore different ways to communicate. And I would like to ask Valerie to read my text, please,
Okay.
if you want.
Sure, sure. Or would you like to hear him read in Spanish? Yeah?
Yeah?
Voila. Okay.
I think it's possible. My Spanish is better. It's better. It's better than my English, for sure. So. En el centro mismo de la pantalla aparece primero un resplandor sin bordes y después la imagen que se define. Se congrega en torno al cuerpo antropomórfico. Un hombre o una mujer bajo el cielo nocturno. Es una noche falsa proyectada en croma sobre el fondo del estudio, sin luna pero con algunas constelaciones reconocibles, entre las cuales, a la derecha del cinturón de Orión, entre Betelgeuse y Canis Major, el rostro se manifiesta. Los ojos verdes revelan manchas diseminadas en el iris. Los trazos del delineador y la nariz del tipo romana le atribuyen una expresión casi faraónica. Bajo los párpados, unas pestañas de longitud desproporcionada se elevan y descienden como si una mariposa quisiera remontar el vuelo. Una vez escuché la llamada de la ninfa salmácida y bebí de las mismas aguas que el hijo de Hermes y Afrodita, y de la transfusión de sus cuerpos también emergí yo, Avalobara, para difundir la voz poseída de los espíritus algonquinos, hijas mías, y la voz absoluta de la vieja Baba Yaga, la de Hatshepsut, y la de la diosa cósmica Hathor con orejas de vaca, la de los cátaros y su señora del pensamiento, la de la beguina y mística Hadewich de Amberes, la de Santa María Egipciaca, la de Margarita y la de Dulcino, y la de Tertuliano y su sentencia. Creo en estas cosas porque son increíbles.
And if you'd like to know what that is in English, you can buy a copy in English. Okay, so I'm just going to read the last paragraph of the introduction to give you a little bit of a sense of why we are doing this kind of work with Granta. It's, for me, always just such a special pleasure to be able to share with the world the writing that's in the Spanish language. It's living a particularly strong, rich moment right now. So it's very satisfying to have the chance to share their writing with other people. Then after I read this, we'll listen to Pedro close for us. So, art lives upon discussion, Henry James said, upon experiment, upon variety of attempt, upon the exchange of views and comparison of standpoints. This is what allows us to transcend mere cultural milieu and touch on the universal. Those of us who dedicate our lives to the arts, and particularly to literature, know this is the reason we do such a thing, for the geometry of transformation, the correspondences, the connections, the existential bridges to the realm of the other, myriad, endless adventures of human experience. So here's to the 10 years to come, and to the state of letters in the Spanish language, and to quote our beloved Don Quixote, "Thou hast seen nothing yet."
Thank you.